The drill bit screamed as it cut through oak, the sound sharp enough to rattle the windows of the half-finished kitchen. Rob Matz leaned into the work, sweat darkening the collar of his flannel, sawdust clinging to his arms. It was the kind of day where the noise in his hands was preferable to the noise in his head. Then his phone rang. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A direct call, shrill, insistent, cutting through the construction site like an alarm. Rob glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, he let those go to voicemail. But something about the hour, about the static pulse in his chest, made him swipe. Mr. Matz? A woman's voice, calm, clipped, with the sterile weight of bad news. This is Dr. Wells from Mercy General Hospital. Are you Olivia Mather's husband? The oak plank slipped beneath his hand. The drill nearly gouged the countertop. Yes, he said slowly. Why? Your wife collapsed at her workplace earlier today. She's stable, but we need you to come in immediately. Rob shut his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't in the kitchen anymore. He was back in the living room last night, staring at Olivia's empty wineglass and her shoes kicked off by the door at midnight, long after her supposed yoga class had ended. Stable, the doctor had said. But the word felt flimsy, temporary, like a bridge about to give. I'll be there in 20. Rob said, already peeling off his work gloves. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. He hated that smell, it clung to you, even after you left. Rob walked through the sliding glass doors still wearing his tool belt, as if he'd been ripped from one life and shoved into another without warning. The waiting area was all muted colors and flickering televisions. A nurse led him down a narrow hall lined with plastic chairs where strangers pretended not to watch each other's grief. Dr. Wells met him at the end of the corridor. She was thin, with eyes like burned-out streetlights, tired, unblinking. Mr. Matz, she said softly, gesturing toward a side room. We should talk privately. The room was small, all stainless steel and humming fluorescent light. On the table sat a clipboard and a manila folder, placed neatly as if this were business instead of crisis. Your wife experienced a sudden collapse, Dr. Wells explained. She's been placed under observation. But her tests showed additional complications. She hesitated, flipping the folder open. She's contracted a rare infection. One that suggests multiple exposures over an extended period of time. Rob froze. The words were clinical, but their meaning wasn't. Infection. Multiple exposures. His chest felt hollow, like a beam punched out of a house frame. We haven't. He stopped, jaw tightening. We haven't been close in months. The doctor's gaze flicked toward the folder again, then away. There's more, she said carefully. A man came to see her earlier. Said he was a co-worker. Very upset. He left before we could ask further questions. Rob didn't need a name. He could already picture the man. Perfect haircut. Expensive watch. That smug laugh from the office Christmas party when Olivia had introduced him as just Trent, a consultant. Dr. Wells slid the manila envelope across the table. We found these in your wife's belongings. Inside, travel brochures, bank statements. A note scrawled in Olivia's delicate handwriting. Can't wait to start our new life together. The air in the room seemed to constrict. Rob read the words twice, then a third time, but they didn't change. 15 years of marriage distilled to a scribble on hotel stationery. He laughed once, sharp, humorless. So let me get this straight. She cheats on me, plans to drain our accounts, and then collapses in the middle of her escape plan? Dr. Wells didn't answer. She didn't need to. Rob pushed the folder back across the table, his hands steady even though his insides were shaking. Then tell me, doctor, what exactly do you need me for? The story of his marriage hadn't ended in the hospital room upstairs. It had ended months ago, with whispered lies and late-night absences. But now it was official, the frame was cracked, the foundation ruined. And Robert Matz wasn't the kind of man who left broken things lying around. Not anymore. The cafeteria smelled of burnt coffee and reheated soup, but to Rob it smelled like judgment. Every table had an audience, nurses on break, families clutching styrofoam cups, patients wheeled in with their 4 poles trailing like shadows. They all pretended not to watch him, but he knew better. Small towns thrived on theater, and tonight he was the headline act. At the far end of the room sat Gerald and Patricia Whitman, Olivia's parents. Wealth wrapped itself around them like armor: pressed suits, gold jewelry, the unspoken privilege of people who never scrubbed grease from their fingernails. Gerald's expression was granite. Patricia's was glass, fragile, sharp, ready to cut. Rob approached, coffee in hand, as if it were a shield. "Robert." Gerald's voice could have frozen the steam rising from the cup. "We need to discuss your wife's treatment." "My wife?" Rob let the words linger, heavy. "Funny. Didn't see her writing Robert and Olivia on that note in her purse. Just her name. And Trent's." Patricia recoiled, scandalized. "She's unconscious in a hospital bed and you're making cruel jokes." "Cruel?" Rob's laugh was quiet, dangerous. "Cruel is draining our savings, booking flights to Costa Rica, and leaving a note that says she'll handle Rob first." A silence spread between them, thick as tar. The cafeteria audience leaned in, pretending not to. Before Gerald could respond, another voice cracked through the tension. "Dad?" "Casey." She stood in the doorway, shoulders squared in her debate team jacket, her eyes already burning with fury. 17 years old and too young to carry a look that heavy. She crossed the cafeteria floor like a prosecutor entering a courtroom, and every step said guilty until proven innocent. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, loud enough for the room to still. "Mom is upstairs hooked up to machines, and you're down here, what, gloating?" Rob blinked. That one word, Dad, felt like both a lifeline and a dagger. He wanted to explain, to pull her into the truth, but she was already building her case against him. "Language," he said softly. It was instinct, not strategy. Her laugh was bitter. "You don't get to play dad right now. Not when Mom needs you and you're walking away." "Casey, no!" Her voice cracked, but the anger carried her. "You're selfish. You've always been selfish. Mom was right about you." Then came the sound that would replay in his mind long after the night ended, the sharp, stunning crack of her palm across his cheek. The slap echoed through the cafeteria like a gavel striking wood. Rob didn't flinch. He just stood there, cheek burning, heart torn open. But it wasn't the slap that hurt. It was the look in her eyes, disgust, betrayal, belief that he was the villain in her story. Patricia wrapped an arm around Casey, pulling her close like a prize reclaimed. "See? Even your daughter sees you for what you are," she hissed. Gerald's voice was colder than steel. "You may not want the responsibility, Robert. But you will not abandon Olivia. We'll take legal action if we must." Rob set his coffee down slowly, deliberately, as though laying a weapon on a table. His voice, when it came, was steady. "You want responsibility? Fine. You can have it. Every cent. Every decision. Every sleepless night. Congratulations, Gerald. Patricia. You just inherited your daughter's mess." Casey's eyes filled with tears, but not for him. She pulled tighter against her grandparents, whispering words he couldn't hear. "Maybe I hate him, maybe worse." The cafeteria seemed to breathe again, the audience shifting back into their own dramas. But Rob felt hollowed, as if Casey's slap had knocked something loose inside him. He turned and walked out, boots heavy on the linoleum. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees. Rob leaned against the wall, pressing his palm to the sting on his cheek. He thought of all the nights he'd sat on the porch waiting for Olivia to come home, convincing himself she was just working late. He thought of Casey at 10 years old, curled on the couch in pajamas, waiting for a bedtime story that never came because her mother was at yoga. He thought of every compromise he'd made, every dollar saved, every nail driven into the life he thought he was building. And now, in the eyes of his daughter, it all made him a monster. Rob exhaled, long and slow, forcing the ache back down where it couldn't control him. Fine. Let them believe the worst. Monsters survived longer than fools. And survival, he realized, was only the beginning. Murphy's Tavern was half empty, the kind of place where neon signs buzzed louder than the conversations. The jukebox wheezed out an old Springsteen track while two men argued over darts. Rob sat in the corner booth with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The amber liquid caught the light, glowing like something alive, but he just stared at it. Across from him, Eddie Grant, best friend since high school, fellow survivor of broken bones and broken dreams, nursed a beer. His weathered face said he'd seen this kind of unraveling before. "You look like hell," Eddie said. "Feel worse," Rob muttered. "You talked to Casey?" "She talked to me." With her hand. Rob touched the fading welt on his cheek, not bitter, just hollow. "She hates me, Ed, thinks I'm the bastard who abandoned her mother." Eddie studied him for a long moment. "And you're just gonna let her believe that? What choice do I have?" Olivia spun her web. "Her parents are running interference. Casey's 17, old enough to know better, but still young enough to think her mom's some saint. If I fight it, I look defensive. If I stay quiet, I look guilty. So what's the play?" Eddie leaned forward, voice low. Rob didn't answer right away. His thumb traced the rim of the glass, circling. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes had sharpened. "The play," he said slowly, "is to stop being the guy who fixes everyone else's mess. Olivia's spent months rewriting the story. Maybe it's time I started writing my own." Eddie grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble. "Now you're talking." Later, in the solitude of his truck, Rob let the silence press down. The world outside was all rain-slick streets and glowing tail lights, but inside, the war was in his chest. Part of him wanted to drive to the hospital, sit at Olivia's bedside, and scream until she opened her eyes. Demand answers. Demand remorse. Demand something human. But the other part, the part that had survived years of her subtle cuts, her late arrivals, her empty words, knew better. Olivia had already given him her truth. In ink, in bank transfers, in whispered plans scribbled on hotel stationery. She'd made her choice. Now he would make his. The next morning, Rob stood in his garage staring at his tool bench. Wrenches lined up like soldiers. Drills and hammers gleaming under the fluorescent light. He built houses with these tools. Decks. Kitchens. Futures. He wondered what else they could build. Or unbuild. On the pegboard above the bench hung a photo, Casey at 12 years old, holding up her first birdhouse, paint smudged across her cheek. Olivia had taken the picture, laughing, wineglass in her free hand. That laugh had once been his favorite sound. Now it was a ghost. Rob pulled the photo down, slid it into his pocket. A reminder of what he was protecting, of who he was fighting for, even if she didn't believe it yet. By noon, he was parked across from the lofts, a sleek apartment complex with glass balconies and manicured hedges. Trent's Tesla sat in its reserved spot, gleaming under the sun like a trophy. Perfect. Rob watched through the windshield, waiting. At 8:15, right on schedule, Trent strutted out of the lobby in designer jeans, phone pressed to his ear, voice carrying across the lot. "Yeah, she's still in the hospital. Complicated, man. No, I don't know how long. Just look, I'll figure it out. Flights can be changed." Rob's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. Flights. Costa Rica. He waited until Trent drove off, then grabbed his tool bag. Every sound in the garage echoed louder than it should, the click of the drill, the whisper of fishing lines sliding through his fingers, the hiss of spray paint. He worked with the precision of a craftsman, not a vandal. This wasn't about destruction, it was about message. When he was finished, he stepped back and admired the handiwork. Tiny, nearly invisible sabotage that would gnaw at the car's perfection. A painted warning scrawled across the windshield: "Stay away from married women." Simple. Direct. Undeniable. That night Rob waited. At 6:30 p.m., his phone buzzed, Eddie calling from his vantage point across the street. "You should see this guy, Rob. He's standing there like someone keyed his soul. Taking pictures. Making calls. Losing his mind." Rob almost smiled. Almost. When the unknown number rang an hour later, he answered on the first ring. "You son of a bitch." Trent spat, his voice high, panicked. "What did you do to my car?" Rob let the silence stretch, then said calm as stone. "Stay away from me. Stay away from my property. That includes my wife. She's not your property." "You're right," Rob said. "She's your problem now. And her medical bills? Hope you've got better insurance than that Tesla warranty." He hung up before Trent could answer. In the dark of his kitchen, Rob leaned against the counter, finally pouring himself that whiskey. For the first time in months, the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but moving. He had made his choice. No more fixing. No more enduring. Now, it was about consequences. And consequences had a way of multiplying. Rain slapped the windshield as Rob pulled his truck into his driveway. The porch light flicked on automatically, spilling a warm glow over the weather-beaten steps. But inside, the house felt colder than it ever had. Half the closet stood empty now, Olivia's clothes long gone to whatever yoga classes she'd packed for. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Rob hung his tool belt on the hook, poured himself coffee instead of whiskey, and sat at the table. He needed clarity. He needed control. But the universe wasn't giving him either. A knock thundered at the front door. 3 sharp raps, urgent, demanding. He opened it to find Gerald and Patricia on the porch. Both looked smaller than usual, rain dripping off their expensive coats, but their voices still carried that self-righteous authority Rob had come to hate. "We need to talk," Gerald barked. Rob leaned on the doorframe. "About what? Your daughter's boyfriend's car? Or the little nest egg she was planning to take with him?" Patricia's eyes flashed. "Enough games, Robert. This is about Olivia's treatment. The doctors want to try a new therapy. It costs $40,000, up front." Rob let out a low whistle. "That's a lot of money for a woman who already tried to bankrupt me." "She is your wife," Patricia snapped. "Or have you forgotten that?" "I remember everything," Rob said. His voice was low, steady. "The late nights. The lies. The bank statements. And the part where she listed me as financially responsible while transferring power of attorney to you. Seems like she already made her choice." Gerald stepped closer, jaw clenched. "You think this is about choice? This is about life and death. If you walk away from her now, you'll regret it for the rest of your days." Rob studied the old man, rain dripping down his face. For a fleeting second, he saw not the banker who despised him for years but a father staring down the fragility of losing a child. And it almost moved him. Almost. But then he remembered Casey's slap. Olivia's laughter with Trent. The note, "Just need to handle Rob first." He shook his head. "No. Her life isn't mine to carry anymore. It's hers. And yours if you're willing to mortgage your mansion for it." Patricia's lip trembled. Gerald's fists curled. But Rob closed the door before either could fire back. The next day, Casey showed up at his office. The warehouse smelled of sawdust and machine oil, the familiar comforts of work. But when Casey walked in, pale and exhausted, Rob felt unmoored. She looked so much like Olivia when she was younger, sharp features, determined eyes, that for a moment he saw the ghost of the woman he first fallen in love with. "Grandpa told me everything," she said, sinking into the chair opposite his desk. Rob stayed silent, letting her speak. About the money. About Mom's plan. About Trent. Her voice cracked on his name. "Why, Dad? Why would she do that?" Rob leaned back, folding his hands. "I don't know, Casey. You'll have to ask her when she's strong enough. But I do know this, she didn't just lie to me. She lied to you too?" Casey shook her head, fighting tears. "She wouldn't leave me. Not like that. She would have given you a choice. Her or me. And I think you already know which one you would have picked. Casey's defenses crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, sobs ripping through her. Rob's chest ached, but he rounded the desk and pulled her into his arms. For the first time in weeks, she didn't push him away. "What are we going to do, Dad?" she whispered. Rob stroked her hair. "We're going to survive. Together. But surviving isn't enough anymore." That night, Rob stood in front of his bathroom mirror, tying the black bow tie Olivia had once insisted he rent for events like Meridian Solutions' annual charity gala. The tuxedo felt stiff, foreign, like armor borrowed from someone else's war. He stared at his reflection, a construction worker in a rented tux, jaw rough with stubble, eyes hardened by betrayal. He thought about the gala, Olivia's favorite stage, the one she'd prepped for with new dresses, manicures, whispered dreams of climbing higher. She wouldn't be there. But he would. And for once, he wasn't going as the quiet, loyal husband standing in her shadow. He was going as the man ready to burn the curtain down. The Marriott ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, all sequins and champagne flutes. Polished laughter floated above the hum of a string quartet. The annual Meridian Solutions charity gala was everything Olivia had loved: power on display, success measured by cufflinks and designer gowns. Rob moved through the crowd like an intruder in enemy territory. His tuxedo itched, his boots heavy against the polished floor. People nodded politely, their smiles faltering when they realized who he was. The husband. The ghost behind the scandal. At the bar, Brianna Walsh spotted him first. Olivia's confidant. Her expression flickered with guilt before she turned back to her drink. Rob didn't break stride. Tonight wasn't about her. It was about the truth. Marcus Webb, Meridian CEO, was working the room with his politician's grin when Rob intercepted him. "Marcus," Rob said, voice calm, almost pleasant. "A word?" Marcus's eyes darted toward the cameras, the board members, the investors. "Perhaps later, Robert. This isn't the time." Rob handed him an envelope, thick with papers. "Then you'll want to read this before the time picks you." Marcus hesitated, then flipped the folder open. The color drained from his face. Emails. Texts. Records. Olivia's fingerprints smeared across company servers, leaking confidential data to Trent. Hotel receipts charged during work retreats. Copies of bank transfers. This could destroy us," Marcus stammered, shoving the folder closed. "Not my problem," Rob said. "I just thought you'd want to know what your golden HR director was up to before she collapsed mid-escape plan." Marcus's jaw tightened. For the first time all evening, his grin cracked. Near the silent auction tables, Trent held court. Perfect suit. Perfect hair. The crowd laughed too loudly at his stories about digital disruption. Rob approached quietly, but the moment Trent saw him, the blood drained from his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rob said, his voice carrying just enough to draw nearby eyes, "allow me to introduce myself. Robert Matz. Olivia's husband." The group stilled. Trent tried to laugh, but it broke halfway. "Robert, maybe this isn't actually, it's the perfect time." Rob pulled a phone from his jacket pocket. 6 months of messages. "Let me share a few." He read, clear and steady. "Can't wait to get you alone tonight. Rob's working late again. The things you do to me should be illegal. Rob would die if he knew what we were doing in his bed." Gasps rippled through the circle. Phones tilted upward, recording. The ballroom air shifted, sweet wine turned sour. "Stop," Trent hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. Rob's hand flipped a photo onto the table. Olivia and Trent, bare-shouldered in a hotel mirror, smiling like teenagers with no consequences. The crowd sucked in a breath. Rob's voice cut sharper. "This man didn't just steal my wife. Together, they stole money. From our family. From our daughter's future. From every person who trusted them. They planned to disappear to Costa Rica. The flights were already booked." Trent lunged for the photo. Rob stepped back. Explain that, Rob said. Trent stammered, eyes darting to the cameras, the witnesses, the CEO pushing through the crowd with fury in his eyes. I never meant, you never meant for it to come out, Rob finished for him. The room buzzed like a hive kicked open. Whispering, filming, judging. The crowd no longer belonged to Trent. It belonged to the scandal. Here's the truth, Rob said, voice low but strong. My wife thought I was too boring, too small for the life she wanted. She traded 15 years for a fling with a coward. Tonight you all get to see the real Olivia Mathers. And the real Trent Collier. Trent's mask cracked. He pushed through the crowd, stumbling toward the exit under a storm of flashing phones and murmured disgust. Rob stood still, letting the silence bloom in his wake. Sorry for the interruption, he told the stunned audience. But sometimes the truth doesn't wait for permission. Then he turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 reputations. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin. For the first time in months, his lungs filled without resistance. His phone buzzed furiously in his pocket, texts, calls, no doubt already a wildfire online, but he ignored them. Eddie was waiting at the curb in his pickup. How'd it go? He asked. Rob climbed in, tugged at the bow tie until it came loose. It's done. Eddie grinned. Hell of a show. But Rob wasn't smiling. He stared out the window as the ballroom lights receded behind them, the noise of scandal fading into the distance. It hadn't been about the show. It had been about the silence afterward. And in that silence, Rob finally felt the shift. He wasn't the fool anymore. He was free. The hospital corridor was almost empty when Rob arrived. Midnight painted the linoleum floors in pale gray, and the hum of the fluorescent lights echoed like a secret no one wanted to share. He carried no flowers, no gifts. Just the weight of 15 years folded neatly inside his chest. Olivia's room was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, the glow of monitors flickering against the walls. She was awake now, thin, pale, but alive. Her eyes widened when she saw him, filling instantly with tears. Rob, she whispered, voice raw. Thank God. I was so scared. He closed the door behind him and pulled the chair to her bedside. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the steady beep of the machine that measured her heart. I know everything, he said at last. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud. It was tired, stripped down to bone. Olivia's face tightened. The mask she'd worn for years, sweet wife, perfect professional, slid into place, but it was cracked now. I made mistakes, she said quickly. I lost my way. But we can fix this. You and me. We can start over. Rob leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You plan to take our money. You plan to leave me. You plan to give Casey a choice between her father and your fantasy. That isn't a mistake, Olivia. That's betrayal. She flinched, as though the word itself cut her. I was lonely, she whispered. You work so much, and I know. Rob shook his head. Don't you dare twist this into something I caused. I built a life for us with my hands. I gave you every damn thing you asked for. And it still wasn't enough. Her eyes brimmed, and for once, there was no performance in them. Only desperation. Please, Rob. Don't leave me like this. He stood, pulling a folder from inside his jacket, and placing it gently on the tray beside her bed. Divorce papers. Signed. I'm not leaving you, Olivia, he said quietly. You already left me. I'm just putting it in writing. Her breath caught. For the first time, she looked small, diminished, not the woman who had schemed and lied, but someone broken by the consequences of her own choices. Rob turned to go, but paused at the door. Trent's gone, he said softly. Vanished. Whatever you thought you were building with him, he didn't stay to see it through. You gambled everything, and you lost. Her tears spilled then, silent, unchecked. But Rob didn't stay to comfort her. He closed the door gently behind him, leaving her to the sound of her own heartbeat. Casey was waiting in the hallway. Her hair was pulled back, her face still blotched from crying, but her eyes met his in a way they hadn't in weeks, clear, searching. "Did you talk to her?" she asked. "Yes." "And?" Rob took a breath. "And now it's just us." For a long moment, Casey said nothing. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, arms tight around his waist. It was awkward, painful, like trying to rebuild a house from splintered boards. But it was real. "I don't know how to forgive her," Casey whispered. "You don't have to," Rob said. "You just have to keep living. That's enough." Outside, the night air was sharp, cutting through the hospital's stale smell. Eddie's truck idled at the curb, headlights spilling across the asphalt. "You done?" Eddie asked as Rob climbed in. "Yeah," Rob said, staring out at the dark horizon. "It's over." But in his chest, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like standing in the ruins of a house after the fire, smoke still curling in the rafters. The life he had built was gone, but so was the weight that had held him there. Eddie pulled onto the road, and the hospital lights shrank behind them. For the first time in months, Rob felt something like peace, not joy, not triumph, but peace. He rested his hand against his pocket. Inside was a photograph, Casey at 12, paint on her cheek, holding a crooked birdhouse with a grin too big for her face. That was the foundation he had left. And it was enough to start again. Sometimes betrayal doesn't break you. Sometimes it strips you down to what's real. And sometimes the only way forward is to leave behind the ruins, and walk into the night with nothing but your own name intact. Rob didn't look back.